Okay, why don't we get started? Thanks everyone for being here. We have a special guest today, the Green Dialogue, which has been going every week for the last 3 years, over 3 years now. And many of you have been part of that. We like to record the special speakers that we have. And today Brent Forsberg is joining us. And Brent has been involved with several sustainability related projects in the greater Lansing area. And he's been in real estate sales and investing in development for almost a quarter of a century. And we're going to learn a little bit more about what he's been doing, and be some opportunity for Q&A, and he might have some questions for us. So without further ado, welcome, Brent.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, excited to be here today. And yeah, I love interaction, so please feel free to interrupt at any time. And, we just kind of go through, and I put a small presentation together. It's all right. Let me get the share screen going here. All right. Zoom buttons. There we go. Don't want to present in Teams. Sorry.
That's okay. No, that's okay. There may be a small presentation button on the lower right-hand corner.
Yep, there it is. Okay, thank you. Oh, no. I pull it out of present mode. It was working fine a few minutes ago. All right, what are you guys seeing right now?
The economics of building place.
Awesome. All right. So, okay. Sorry about that. So, Leroy, thank you for the introduction. Yeah. So, I'm a third generation infrastructure developer. My grandfather and father were more focused on sewer and road building, and started in development in the 60s and 70s. Working on a lot of the first ring of communities post World War II in our region. And something that they always taught me was when we build places, it has to be something that people can connect to. And it started with some of the subdivisions that they were building at the time that were autocentric, having some of the first parks and amenities and green space in them. Because my grandfather always said that there has to be a place that you can go for people to throw a ball for a minute, or just be able to walk and be outside and have a little space, and more than just their yard in the community. So that's kind of that philosophy that I grew up in and learned as I became a developer. And some of our core philosophies today are making sure that when we're building something, that it really connects the space to people. And then in the last decade, really understanding, as we see climate change coming and the volatility, how can we build places that are a little bit more resilient? Now, I focus a little bit more today on kind of how we got to where we're at right now in some of our designs, and then we can talk a little bit about how to look at the connection. So the graphic here is our project in downtown Lansing. It was a collaboration with the land bank. And this was the old Deluxe Insight, where we've now put 72 new residential units. And this project used PACE financing, and it's all green, it's all electric. So we used the PACE model to help us build this even a little bit more sustainable. And being site, we're doing a lot of natural water collection on it, and using French drains, using deep-rooted grasses and things that I don't have pictures yet, because we're still finishing this up, and it'll be done in about a month, and we'll be able to use that as a showcase if anybody wants to come tour it. But the other piece too was this is what faces the corner of Malcolm X and Washington. And Rio Town, which is where this project is known for their murals. So we hired a local artist, and to be part of the community and connect with the culture of the community, had them build or make this mural on the side of our building for us. And starting with the messaging of say nice things about Lansing. That was the theme that we'd given the artist. And it's always a little bit scary because we don't get to see the designs necessarily ahead of time. We just give them the direction that they have to be able to stand next to their grandmother and a 5-year-old and not feel uncomfortable staring at the mural. So we're excited. This is just getting unveiled right now, and just kind of a representation of how we look at development and connecting with places. If you follow me on Facebook at all, you know I love memes. This is one of my favorites. Is older folks ask why kids don't go outside anymore, and then this is the outside we built for them. And when we look at design of place and we look at some of the issues that we're facing with flooding as we see these bigger rain events, it's because of the infrastructure that we designed. And this was our idea of auto-centric. This was a new technology that really took hold post-World War II, and we on our suburban designs for how we built these communities. But a lot of the design that we face and a lot of the social issues that we face in communities really started back in the 20s and 30s as we started this modern growth period for our urban centers. So this is the redlining map of Lansing. Are people familiar with redlining overall with the group? I see some heads shaking yes. So, when Lansing's map came out, this is what it looked like between Lansing and East Lansing. And the areas in red today, especially these, if you take a look at how 127 and 496 come through our city, it's really not a surprise. And this happened around the country. So, Lansing as a region fell victim to that as well. And one thing to keep in mind is with redlining, of the districts that are still around today that weren't wiped out by highways, 74% of them are still in deep poverty. And this comes into over time that investment never went back into these areas to really allow for that growth to continue and for those areas to evolve, which is how we get some of the stratification that we're seeing in design right now. And just as we went through the 1950s, when we started looking at how we connect our communities, and we talked a little bit about the auto-centric, that was designed around intentional decentralization policies. This idea that, number one, we had the automobile to move things around, and it allowed us to decentralize coming out of World War II, so that way we could spread out our industries and make it harder for an area to lose its economic center as we went through the Cold War, and allowed for easier building, because it's always easier to build on a green space and expand infrastructure than it is to try to rebuild in areas where the buildings are being taken down and where older infrastructure is. This just kind of shows on Baker Street what the fabric used to look like in our neighborhoods. These corner stores that used to be every few blocks that people went to, and we moved to these larger strip malls like what we had with Logan Square. And what that's done over time is we've seen this area that was the new design of the 60s and 70s is now our new areas of blight that we're focusing on in communities to try to retrofit. I heard a statistic from Midmiac that what was done over at the Red Cedar project is taking 50 tons of pollution out of the Montgomery drain every year, where they've gone in and retrofitted that large parking lot with the sand and deep-rooted grass system that was put in alongside of it. So we're just getting to the point now where we're understanding what we've done to our ecology and our systems that we live in, based on these older designs that were all mechanical, with the idea to get water as fast as possible into the drains at that time, not necessarily caring how we treated that water coming in. So, it's an exciting time in development because we're looking at a lot of these things of how we retrofit older projects, but in future design, how do we implement this more? I just want to go through a couple other quick slides, looking at the designs and the patterns that we pulled out of our areas, because as we've gone through it in evolution of time, we kind of forget, this is down, I think this one was, I don't remember what city this was, Detroit, I think, where we took our neighborhood fabrics and just ran these giant highways through, which really broke up how our communities built. And we're a product of 80 plus years of decisions. I mean, even Lansing itself, you take this area, just to give you an idea, there's Bogie Tower, there's the Capitol, and this area was full of housing. And there's a great project that MSU did a couple years ago that told the stories of these neighborhoods. But we lost 800 homes through this area, and over time built out to these large parking lots that have made it harder for the core city to sustain its retail and commercial downtown, and really kind of hurts the fabric of the community overall. And that was the social center in the 50s and 60s. You take a look, there's where the Knapp Center is. There's no gaps in Washington Avenue in the 1950s. And a couple of years ago, we did a parking study downtown. And if you take a look, everything in red is surface parking. And this is changing a little bit as some of the new developments come in. But when we look at it and we talk about walkable communities and building spaces people want to be, when we rip out all of the commercial and residential that was down there that made our core strong, you can see why we have some of the issues that we have today. And by going through autocentric, we really forgot about connecting these residential pathways to each other. This is one in Lansing, and we went through and looked, but this is all over the place where we design our walkable pathways around our road system, which isn't how we as people want to move. So when we look at our communities, this is something that we've been doing as we're bringing developments in, is how can we rebuild that walkability back into it as we redesign what we're doing and connecting back to the fabric, and not using it as a convenience that we have to do the pathways along the traditional road system, but building some of these connections and other ways of how people actually want to move through the area. Because there's a lot of opportunity that can be done to create that connection back to nature with these pathways, and make it where it's a true form of transportation and easier for people to access. So this one is a Dollar General over on Waverly, which this area is kind of a food desert. This is the one spot it's got. If you were to go where that red car is on the road pathway, it's over a half a mile walk where it's 200 yards using this little pathway. And the folks keeping the fence to go through, and the landlord of the building keeps putting it back up. But people don't want to take that walk. And you can see this is a well-used path to get through this property. And what it's done with our policy is, we really took diversity out of our housing over time. When you take a look at how we built, especially in the late 19th and early 20th century, we had quite a mix that built our community fabrics, from the detached homes to the duplexes, triplexes, courtyard, bungalow style, our brownstones, and then the mixed-use buildings that we really started retrofitting in the late 90s, early 2000s, then our mid and high rise. And from 1945-ish until just recently, 72 was when the law started to change again. And it really wasn't until the early 90s we saw a push back to other models. All of this was pretty much regulated out of design patterns for the United States. So we focused heavily on the single family homes, and we focused on the larger stuff where it made sense. So, when we take all of this together, and this is as a developer, what we're saying is, okay, we understand we've really overbuilt in the single family homes, and having just large residential doesn't necessarily create a good quality of life either in communities. So we're starting to say, how can we bring all of these pieces back together as we kind of retrofit into the fabric of our community, what the next level of development going into the mid 21st century and going to the 22nd century is what are those patterns going to be? What's our legacy going to be for the next 80 years that we're leaving behind for the next generation to work with? And just to give an example of some of the financing issues that come with this, when we look at the types of loans that are available, these play a major role in what types of development occur. So mixed use, people realize that having that quality of life is important, but a lot of times with mixed use, the only choice that you have is to use what's known as recourse debt from banks. And this was using interest from a year and a half ago, and I got to update this model because we could get non-recourse debt on apartments at 3.2%, and the interest at that time for recourse debt for a mixed use was 5%. And what happens is the federal government, starting in the 90s, said, okay, we need more housing. So they really allowed FHA to be used like it is for the single family home for developers to build housing. And then the mixed use still had to use the smaller local banks. So with their liquidity requirements from the Federal Reserve, they want shorter term loans because they want to have the flexibility to not reloan on it. And when you take the difference between the terms and the cost of the loan, for every $500,000 of debt a year and a half ago, every 15 years, anybody doing a mixed use building lost $142,000 of equity that went back to interest and fees to the local banking system. So, we've perpetuated this model that doesn't allow us to get people equity and to grow, especially the small businesses and small developers that want to do those types of projects. So it's something, we're looking at this overall system that we're trying to work on policy as well as a development company. How can we address some of these issues to build the infrastructure behind to create the types of communities that people want to be a part of? And how we look at this is we achieve this by asking the right questions. And one of the problems that humanity goes into is we're always looking for a solution for things, and we want to find that answer quickly. And that's where we've changed our process a little bit as a development company years ago and said, okay, let's not focus our questions on finding solutions. Let's focus our questions on what's needed to foster growth. And it's a little nuanced, but the difference is we have to fix the sidewalks or infrastructure. And it's asking the question instead, okay, what's the outcome that the community wants in this area? What do we want to achieve? Well, we want to achieve better connections. Better connections to what? We have this park over here. We have this commercial building over here. You have to drive to them because it's easier and safer than trying to walk to them. So now we can begin to understand and look at patterns that can emerge coming out of it and beginning to foster the values that come within our communities. Because everybody, it's different in every community, but they all rhyme, right? We want a safe, comfortable place to live that allows us to have a quality of life that creates opportunity and gives us better hope for the future. And that's how growth occurs. So starting with that and beginning to understand the values that are applied locally to that, we can get to some of those questions to foster that type of growth. And here's an example of it. So solving for an outcome, how do we regulate to protect risk and financing? And this, I go back to the banking because it's one of the areas that we're focused on right now. The banks we're seeing the interest rates go up to hedge inflation. That changes the risk models for the banks, especially on retail and professional office right now. And so they're looking at, okay, well, we're not going to renew loans in a year and a half, which is going to further cause problems potentially for developers and building owners that aren't going to be able to continue the finance. You're going to have rates that start to make it where more cash is taken out of the system that allows for future growth. And then looking at it from setting conditions, how can we create an economic ecosystem focused on helping people prosper in our regions? And there's an area called Boston Square in Grand Rapids, is one of the closest to us, that are working on creating their own local CDFI, which is a community development financing institution, using local money to create the local types of projects that the neighbors have been working on for over a decade to build in there. So they're creating a new condition that is aligned with our national finance system, but building it at a local level that will build more resiliency for what they're doing there. So we look at it from 6 leverage points of how we create these types of spaces, and looking at what are the governance and economics policies that can influence this. And this interaction happens within social. So that's all of us. Us today here is one of the social interactions that creates an opportunity for these discussions to happen. And then the scale of space. And this is an important one because this goes from an individual person up to the entire United States and North America, whatever you want to look at that scale. And when we're talking about our communities, when we're talking about our biosystems, we look at it from we're placed within the Great Lakes Basin. So that's the largest biosystem that we look at as a developer here, because every drop of water that we put into the river system is the quality that's going to go out to the Great Lakes over time. I mean, we're one of the largest watersheds here in the Grand River. So everything that goes in here ends up in Lake Michigan. So we say, okay, how do we scale what we're doing to be able to make that water cleaner and maybe hold more on site so we don't have the flooding, knowing that we're going to have some of these issues in the future. And then our economy, and this is what the United States is built on, is an economic platform. So understanding how do we create more opportunity within that, understanding our geographic restrictions, our land that is vulnerable for our wetlands for protection, but also what can be built there depending on the stability of the soils. And then the governance. You know, we're, I think, in a unique spot in Michigan, being a home rule state. We had regionalism kind of take over in the 90s and early 2000s. With us being home rule and having all of these local jurisdictions, we can be more flexible in our different communities that want to look at how they grow, to be able to make change quickly versus having to go to a regional board. So I think we're going to see that shift kind of come back in the next few years of how we build these communities, and see this hyper local, and areas that get it right are going to be the ones that lead, and we'll see it kind of move around to a lot of these other communities. And then the complexity of the systems, you know, understanding that all of these things interact with each other. You know, we can't have mutually exclusive and myopic policy that is only looking at the regulation of land use, the regulation of the type of business. It's time to take a little bit more holistic approach, and understanding that there is a spatial relationship that happens within these, that if you change one thing over here, you've got to look for what the butterfly effects are that go out across the whole system itself. And then understanding, as we're doing this, how do we measure it? And one of the things that we've been looking at is wealth is easy to measure in the United States because we have a lot of metrics on it. And one of the new ones that we're looking at is the ALICE index, which is asset limited income constrained employed, which Michigan sits at about 44% of our population is within that. What that means is that you're right at that threshold of bare minimal living standards in Michigan, but you are less than a couple months from having a catastrophic economic event. And so as we're looking at that, this gives us an opportunity to change from just looking at median income to looking at, okay, how do we have an index that makes it that people have a quality of life inside of that? And that's some of the things that I'm working with the University of Denver and starting with MSU to say, okay, how can we build some new measurement tools and research to understand that instead of just looking at median income for an area, let's look at it in relation to a quality of life index of how communities, what communities offer. You know, we're seeing a major outmigration right now in the San Franciscos, the Los Angeleses, the New York, because the cost of living is so high. And those communities are starting to realize it's affecting their GDP as they don't get the economic output from their large companies. And large companies are also realizing people don't want to live there either. So you have areas in Texas and other areas in the Midwest that are starting to benefit from this. And I saw a report from Freddie Mac a couple of weeks ago. It was a conference. Their chief economist was talking about now the Nashvilles and some of these second tier cities that got expensive in the last decade are starting to see the outmigration too. and some of the smaller communities in the regions are winning, which I think gives us, as the Lansing region, a real opportunity with our affordability and quality of life to capitalize on this right now, as we see some of the investments in the large manufacturing to be able to build onto this. So, as we're looking at these measurements, these are the conversations that we're looking at, that it's not just anymore about the exact dollar, but how do we make it an index with the quality of life? And how we build that is through creating a web of the urban fabric. So understanding that everything that we're doing is within this built environment of our community, and building this stronger network of strategic partners and government and the neighborhood associations, our nonprofits, our universities in the area, to create something that is more resilient in the future. And we start with that just by defining our critical issues in the area, understanding that our community, our natural systems, our research, and our government all comes around to create this idea of regenerative communities. And regenerative is looking at the ecology, looking at the people within it, looking at the built environment and the finance models, to have something that, as it grows over time, it's building on itself and creating more opportunity, using the ideas of leverage and compounding to take it more than just the financial piece, but creating more capacity, more resiliency in our underlying ecology, and having government policy that can be more flexible as it moves forward, and understanding that the principles are within the shared vision, the collaboration, the embedded capital that's there, because we always think about the money, but our resources are very much capital too. Our interactions are capital. They create things within that. And then the scale we talked about a little bit, and putting that in an open and transparent model that people can interact with easily. The public process for development was built to make sure people had a way to interact with developers and government as land uses were being introduced. But it needs to be more than that, and we're seeing that now, and that's why you're seeing developers starting to do more of the charrettes and meeting with neighborhoods before even engaging the community, the governance of the community. We talked about the sustainability and the resiliency, and this is the important as we are watching these big storm events and what we just had last week. It's going to change the model of how we build, so that way we make sure that we're safe and that we protect life and property as we move forward. And then again, using that within the regenerative model. One of the groups that we work with is CityCraft, and this is kind of what it looks like, is this integrated process where you have not necessarily these set square lines between these different values and understandings of the capitals in our community, but there's more flow. And this is what we're trying to model here, is that we have this connectivity. Parks and recreations connect with the connectivity, giving people places to go, but also our natural systems. And this was a project that they did in Denver, reconnecting the river system and the transportation to a lot of areas that have been disconnected, even close to the downtown, with 25 and 70 being in there, kind of disconnecting some of these neighborhoods. Health and food, and understanding the bicycle routes can create connectivity, access to health and food. And Walk Denver was one of the groups working on creating better walkable areas to food destinations. And then empowerment and health and food is they worked on the city kitchen models and things to create a way for people to have economic benefit from small businesses starting up, and then access where health and food wasn't there. So it just kind of goes around like that, and saying, okay, where do we build these connections between the groups and resources that are here, and how do we leverage more of the values that we want from the interaction with them? So that gets through the connection side. I do have some pictures pulled up of some other things with low impact design. I don't have a lot on that yet because we're working on the next group, but those are some of the things that we're starting to look at now, is how do we retain more water in site? How do we bring in more natural native species to Michigan into our projects that are part of the local ecology here, versus just using traditional ornamentals that look pretty. So I know I kind of threw a lot at everybody, but I want to get through it quick so we could have a half hour to kind of go through and have a discussion on thoughts and reactions. So I'll shut up.
Thank you so much. And it certainly wasn't fair to ask you to confine your life's work into 30 minutes, but let's open up for Q&A, and thank you very much.
Can I just start off? Hey, Brent, I heard you at that MinMeac talk, and I got to tell you, I'm leaving this one feeling a lot less depressed than I did at that one. Since I've heard that talk, I've gone to up Michigan planning one-day conference here, and the biggest piece I take away from your talk is the disconnect between the banking system and the development world. And that one day that was here in Lansing, that was, if you thought your talk at MinMeac was depressing, oh my God, that was doom and gloom about the future of Michigan. But every time I brought that up, that just stymied the conversation. There's no answer in the planning world for solving that economic issue. We can make all the plans in the world that say, boy, we sure want you to build mixed use developments, but we can't make the banks follow along. And I'm just wondering if you got some kind of suggestion for that.
Well, it is going to take a new system to come alongside the old system. And some of the things that we're looking at right now is a model called a community investment trust that allows for local investment become securities that local communities can invest in and also receive the benefit. Because I mean, what's happening right now, when we look at the growth of the early 20th century that made Michigan what it is, I'm going to use Ford as an example. He raised the wages to $5 a day to create this opportunity to get people here, but he also provided the housing and the infrastructure with it. And that wasn't a perfect system, but it did allow for growth, allowed Ford to grow, allowed Detroit to grow, and built it in a hyper-local network. And as we went past World War II, we had this disconnect in values of the business, our government, and our banking system, because it's easier to measure things and regulate things if we aggregate it bigger and bigger, but that takes the nuance out that allows for the growth to start. So, what we're saying, or what our thoughts are on this, is we have to rebuild these local levels of connections again to financing, to the types of projects. And there isn't a clean solution yet, but that is what we're looking at, is bringing that local investment back is going to be a huge.
You called that a local investment trust.
Community investment trust.
Community, I'm sorry. And who sets that up? Where is that held? So
there's 6 of them that we're aware of that are functioning in the United States right now.
Oh, okay.
And one of them is Plaza 122. I think it's investcit.com in Portland, Oregon. And I met with them a couple years ago, and they're putting together kind of a plan of how this could work and be something scalable. And it was designed by bankers that allowed for a project that was a mid-century strip mall that had a lot of crime to become a asset in the community, where it's now gathering space and has commercial business, and it's owned by people that live within the zip code that community is in. Those are the only folks that are allowed to invest in it. So it's things like that, and how do we build some of the models around that type of growth moving forward? Because it is, it always starts local. And when we try to do it in a national model, it creates a situation where there's winners and losers across the model.
Sure.
And that's where I think we're at a real opportunity 100 years later to use some of those principles that were used to build business and company housing and things in the past, using the social awareness we have today to build those better communities.
Cool. Thank you. I'll step off now and let some others.
Bill.
Hey there. Great stuff. I really appreciate all that. Picking up on this issue of financing, you made reference to something called CDFI, which I'm not sure if that's different than the community investment trust that you were just discussing, or if that was different. And I was also going to, as you were just talking about these community financing, I was thinking about TIFs and our DDA and our Corridor Improvement Authority seeking some sort of community investment revenue from those kinds of vehicles. We also have local millages that we tax ourselves to improve our roads. So it seems, in my mind, in a broad sense, those are kind of the ways that we're currently seeking investment funds to accomplish the kinds of goals that we're after. Are those similar animals? Are they different? How does that play out?
Well, they're all part of what this economic stack has to be to create moving forward. I mean, our system, unfortunately, has gotten so expensive, and then when you add in the supply chain issues and everything, it's making it hard to build. Now, let's start with the CDFI. So that is actually a banking mechanism itself. So a lot of the credit unions have this type of model within them, which allows for growth to occur that are in areas that haven't seen investment. Because the problem that we have right now is if an area stops growing for a little while and then appraisers can't get the appraised value to do more projects, the music stops in those areas because they become risky, which is basically the ripple effect from redlining from the securities model of the 30s. And it's just made it hard that once an area stops seeing growth, it's really hard to get that going again without a lot of cash going into the system. And CDFIs understand this, and there's CRA dollars that banks have to use as well, which is a small portion of their portfolio that's supposed to go to these types of projects. But at the same time, because they're seen as higher risk, it's harder for the banks to deploy in that because their underwriters aren't geared up to understand that. One of the biggest in our area is Scenair, and they're a CDFI that works on using private investment, tax credits, and a lot of the other tools to help build this. And I'm working with them right now to try to get some of their data because their default rates are generally lower than banks. Because what comes with these a lot of times is the social pieces that allow the support for these businesses in these quote unquote high risk areas to thrive, because these small businesses generally are less sophisticated than your Walmarts and Walgreens and things coming in. So it comes with a lot of the tools to help these businesses grow and thrive throughout time, where in a lot of the traditional investment models, that's not there. It's just a finance mechanism being built. They bundle them up into billions of dollars at a time and sell them to the BlackRocks and things who forget about them for 5 to 10 years. So, we're looking at that. That's easy to do, right? Because people can make money a couple percent here and there selling that off. It's really hard to do when you're doing it $100,000, $200,000 at a time at a small banking level, which is why we're seeing that ecosystem get hurt. And and this is where building that local connection back, if that's what we realize we're valuing, we have to reset that ecosystem up. And we're not going to revolutionize the banking world overnight, but we can aggregate where these small ideas are happening right now around the country to say, okay, this is kind of working here. Can we do that here? Because, really all the capital we need is right in our region. There's, just what we have, and we have businesses that want to grow. And if we can show the economic prosperity potential for investing back in housing, for investing in some of these infrastructure connections, we can start some of these realignments of the system. And with tax increment financing, that's a vital tool, especially for redevelopment and working with upgrading the infrastructure and things that's there. Because the problem is with single family homes, to do the infrastructure for the lots, you can't get bank financing on that right now. It's not there. So it either has to be built cash or we have to find another way to do that. And it opens up the ideas of bonds and some of the tools that we used in the past that, if done right, can help manage this for long-term investment into growth. And our pension funds, that money, all of that money is from our local pension funds, was raised from growth here in our communities, and then we ship it to Wall Street and to large investment houses on the coast who are making money off of it and returning just a small portion of that back. And we're talking with a couple local state pension funds right now from some large groups to say, hey, can we invest back in our communities and make that part of it? Now, the industry doesn't want to necessarily hear that because it takes the fees going all the way up and down. But if we can build some of these local mechanisms, we can create ways for that money to stay here longer locally and reinvest back in our area. So, and that's what it's going to take, is really understanding what are the tools that we have, capital mapping the assets that we have, and then saying, how do we align them to benefit everybody that's living here, and show the folks that, and the businesses and other groups in the area that have substantial capital that's plugged into the national system, that, hey, we can create more value if we use it here. And that's the conversations that we've been having over the last 18 months or so that are just starting to really take hold and have worked in other areas. So that's how we kind of start to rebuild that ecosystem.
Wow. Wow. Well, I've got some other thoughts, but I want to give other folks a chance to jump in.
I don't exactly know how to phrase my question, but for me as an environmentalist, I always have the concern of infill development, where the blight is and how you manage that, so that, you're talking about Lansing growth, which I appreciate that, but I also, what that says to me is growth out into farm fields, and just, for me, this is the concern of growth of, and fixing the areas of blight rather than moving out, like staying in the area of Lansing, staying in the areas where they're, to just change and develop in the areas that have already been developed, instead of moving out into green spaces that are still green or whatever. So I don't know. I'm not quite sure of what to even ask, but I just have that concern of, like you said, the areas of blight and how to, I have no realm of what it means to develop. So I'm coming from, you have so much knowledge in that way, but I do have that concern of just trying to hope for salvage the areas that are not developed at that, and just struggling. So. Yeah.
And that's something that we've been focusing on. Our project that I started with, the initial picture. My file on that piece of land started in 2013. It took us 10 years to get from our initial conversation with the land bank to a project. And the reason being is there's really no ecosystem for building a development there. And the city initially wanted a hotel there. And we had a hotel all teed up, ready to go. And we got our letter of commitment from a major hotel brand in January of 2020. So we were months away from that site being a hotel. And then they pulled out in June of 2020. So that changed, and we had to kind of go back to the drawing board, but we were all committed to doing something there, because that was a key connection between Rio Town and downtown that just hasn't functioned in any way, shape, or form to be an ambassador to the entrance of Lansing, because that's for the main exit ramp into downtown right there. So the problems that we ran up against, take our project Elevation in Okemos. We had built 66 units at the same time. We're building 72 units downtown. And the rents to cost ratio for the net operating income was about the same. But we got valued $2 million less downtown when you aligned them apples to apples on the appraisal than we did at Elevation for the same size project. And the reason being was this idea of risk. So that means to do that project downtown, we had to have extra capital to do that, versus the traditional model that we were doing at Elevation. And this is where that infill becomes hard. And then getting an appraisal on a single family home. Right now, a single family home costs $250 a foot, not including the land to build. And if you're building in neighborhood on the infill lots, you can't get the appraisal. So it creates the issues that come up with this perpetuating, we can't it's you can't infill in the system that we have. And the county treasurer is working on models like the housing trust fund and things that will help fill some of those gaps. Because as we kind of reset the system, we have to have that pioneering come in to be able to do that. In 2013, we did our first infill project in Mason on land bank lots and county-owned lots right in downtown Mason. And those first houses that we put in on Columbia and Center Street, we had to build cash because no bank believed that houses could sell for $150,000 in downtown Mason. And we built the first two, they sold under construction. And then the third lot that we had, a retired couple came and ended up plunking down a lot of cash to build their dream house because they wanted to be walkable to downtown. And what happened alongside of that was a lot of the other neighbors then began to fix up their houses, and we saw that come up. So the model does work if you have groups that can come in and kind of set this, but it's got to be careful too, because we can't just do one house over here and one over there. You got to have a little bit of a beachhead that then allows for that growth to happen, but at the same time, be careful on ownership and things that we're not pushing people out of the community. So it's building that balance. And your talk about the green building, that unfortunately with development, that's where banks are willing to loan, and that's where we have to involve the TIFs and things that allow for those equity gaps to be filled to create, because it is more expensive to infill than it is to build out. But at the same time we're building out, we're removing our food systems out of the area. And that's, the second largest industry in Michigan is our agriculture. And our area, I think it equates to like $1.7 billion. And if we keep just incrementally pulling away from that, we're going to have issues. So, it is, and we look at it, Lansing needs to become a major piece of this, and understanding they're trying that where our infrastructure is where we should focus on the more dense development, then look at the incremental stuff out in the outskirts a little bit more. And there's an opportunity for that in our area right now. And LEAP is working on a project with University of Denver and us that is doing a capital map of all of the density allowed in our future land use plans across that inner core of the region. And we're mapping that against the census tract of actual density. And in about a month, we're going to have a report come out that's going to show by census tract, what is the density there, what's allowed by the land use. Then all the municipalities have to do is look at their sewer and water and power capacities there to say, okay, should we be concentrating growth here? Why is this under the density that should be there? So we can quickly map where density and smart growth can grow in our region. So the region is looking at that, and there are groups that are focusing on what that looks like. One of the studies I always refer to is Meridian Township's McKenna study from 2017 that did a really good job of showing the walkability versus the rural housing and kind of the mismatch in our area. And Downtown Lansing Inc. released a report last Thursday on their website that shows the mismatch in downtown Lansing. And it also does cover the region a little bit based on surveys and the demographics of our area of what would balanced housing look like. So we're really beginning right now in our area, and I think we're ahead of a lot of the country of understanding what these models can look like and where should it go. So I'm excited about that. Brian brought up the doom and the gloom is it's really hard with the financing tools and aligning the planning piece back to that. But I think our region's well positioned over most of the country to be able to be a leader in that moving forward, especially going into the mid 21st century. I think that we can build some of these models that the rest of the country is going to turn to and can be what Portland was in the 90s, which is this area of research and understanding of what smart growth is based on our current knowledge set. So that's where I think that we can head with these conversations and how we kind of manage both of those at the same time. So I hope that kind of got to.
Yeah, for sure. When that LEAP study comes out, can we get that or a link or something to that?
Yeah, it's going to be published when it comes out. we've got a group of GIS students working on it right now, and it's still in the GIS shape files, which I don't know how to work that, so I just got to trust them when they show me the pic. They're going to have set on things in the next. They said I think they're about a month from being done.
Is
Okay,
Lee
thank you.
going to publish that, or are you publishing that? Who's actually?
We're not sure. Tri-County might be a part of it. It's just kind of coming together right now of a group of people saying, okay, this is what we're doing and putting together, but Leap funded it.
Okay.
Oh, Kim?
Kim.
Hi.
Hi.
I know that there's more opportunities to redevelop properties in Lansing. But one of the things in Meridian Township that concerns me is the lack of affordable housing for low and medium income families. I know that the banking issues are something that needs to be overcome, but what would be some of the first steps to promote more low and middle income housing as opposed to, the high end McMansions?
So I would suggest getting a hold of Mark McDaniels and his team at Scenair, if that's a priority, to sit down. Mark is one of the top systems in the country for building these models of affordability in communities. And he talks all the time how frustrated he is in Michigan because it's one of the few states that really don't have an ecosystem for that. And he said, he goes, I'm doing more work in the coasts and things than I am here because Michigan just hasn't really grasped this. And in fairness to Michigan, affordability really became a red flag in 2015-16. If you look at the alignment, even the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, our housing stock was pretty well aligned with the distribution of incomes in our areas. It really started to break coming out of the Great Recession. And as we saw cost rise in construction in 2015-16, it began to accelerate in an exponential growth curve where we saw the divergence of affordability and attainability in housing. So it's kind of a newer problem for us because we've always been kind of cost friendly, but it's something that we need to address. I mean, we're watching right now, median income or median household price in 2018 was, I think, 168,000, and now it's in the mid twos. And the houses that are available right now, I think it's like 318 2 weeks ago was the median house price for sale in our region. So we're watching that happen, and it is going to take these conversations of how do we use some of the tools. And the conversation right now, Tri-County is putting together our regional housing plan that's due next week back to MISTA. And there's been a lot of group meetings of folks in housing and municipal planners to say, what are the goals? And what you brought up were in that top 5 of what we have to address in our region. That's going to the MISTA long-term state housing plan, which again is getting ahead of this issue versus a lot of other states, which is exciting that Michigan is really looking at this because, it ties into this economic growth. A lot of research that's come out in the last 5 years, as we go for advanced manufacturing, these large corporations want to invest where workforce is. So having opportunity for our workforce and growth is what's going to help us be able to create more opportunity for everybody in the region. And like I said, the first discussion I think is get with Scenair and understand some of the tools that they've got. We just had through the Michigan Housing Coalition a bunch of bills passed that are going to allow for TIF for residential, allow for pilot programs for workforce housing, attainable housing, which is focusing on the 80% to 120% adjusted median income of the region, which is where our company right now is trying to design product. And what that'll do is by kind of filling that gap that's been missing for a long time, it takes pressure off having to build more of the large luxury stuff, because if people are going to build, you're going to dollar cost average down your square foot, you're going to go bigger. But it allows too for folks to come into housing freeing up some of the affordable that's at the lower income points as people move into different housing choices. So it's, again, kind of building that overall system, and that's what we have to do quickly in our region. And those conversations are happening, but it needs to get down to our local levels to have the communities, the neighborhoods engaged. You know, one of the things that the city of Lansing has been saying for years is, why is 80% of the affordable housing in the region in our municipality? And that comes back to how we zoned in the 50s and 60s again, where, you know, the higher price, lower density housing was out in the new infrastructure areas. So it's having that conversation of looking at what do we need to do if we want to have more affordability in other municipalities. And that brings in transportation, that brings in daycare, access to food alongside of the development. So it does allow for that ecosystem to grow as well. And thank you, Bill, for throwing Sinair's information in there.
Well, we've got about 5 more minutes, which, but willing to stick around as long as you are, Brent. But what are some next steps for Meridian Township as we think about sort of learning this language and redefining some of our priorities? I know Bill's been involved and Brian have been involved with master plan revisions. Are there particular next steps you would suggest for us, or Bill or Brian?
So Jen at the Michigan Municipal League is a good asset for municipalities. They're part of the housing coalition. You know, getting with Tri-County, Emma Gilbert is leading this housing study coming up, and understanding what the priorities are coming out of that, and making sure that Meridian Township's voice has been reflected into that report. And there's about 2 weeks left. So just kind of seeing and understanding what's there. You know, Sinair, I think, needs to be part of this conversation. Getting our local banking institutions together as Meridian Township looks at its growth corridors and what its values are moving forward, that how can we come up with a way to build the infrastructure around the values and the types of housing that Meridian wants to see grow in the future. So I think those are kind of that good starting point that will give some direction to the discussions. And, you know, Rowley over at the housing nonprofit, you know, like the stuff that he's doing on the retrofit of Walter French is something that could be looked at if there's any buildings in Meridian Township that could look at the retrofit. So, you know, that's kind of that ecosystem that's formed around this and is starting to get there. And I think plugging in and understanding, and then with the master planning, just having the right pathways inside of the plan to allow for a little bit of fluidity and control of how this could look moving forward, understanding that it's going to evolve quickly as these new banking and finance systems evolve in the next 3 to 5 years.
Thank you. Any other parting comments from anyone?
Who did you say? What did you say? Rowley something French?
Rowley Van Fousen at the Capital Area Housing Partnership.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Sam Singh. I shook his hand. I got to see him 2 weeks ago. He was a huge help. So everybody thank our senator. I was at a meeting that was on housing from the home builder side, and you know, Sam took the time to show up, and everybody is just really appreciative of what him and Speaker Tate and Hines and a few of the others that were involved in that to really give us some tools. So we're hoping MISHDA gets the guidance out here quickly. I think I'm meeting on that with some members of the Housing Coalition tomorrow. And so that way we can start to implement some of these, because the governor is going to sign this shortly that gives this TIF tool for residential, which has been piloted in Newaygo and a couple other areas. Newaygo is the most famous one right now in the state that this was built off of. So it's an exciting time. There's a lot we have to fix, but our region, I think, is poised to be one of the #1 growth regions, and doing it in a way that allows for capacity in the country. I really believe that we have the tools here, and we have people that are focused on creating this capacity in our region. So I, dealing with all the stuff we have to in banking, and the fact that right now, there really isn't money available for development, which that'll change. I mean, as interest rates stabilize and things, but getting the infrastructure in place so we can go when the winds align with us again, I think is the important piece right now. And I see it happening. So that's exciting.
Thank you so much for joining us. If there's any other burning questions, feel free, but probably let folks move on to their days shortly. I hope you come back, Brent. I've got a lot to learn from you, and also be happy to share your email if folks have further questions.
Yeah, please. Email is great. LinkedIn and Facebook too. So yeah, please reach out anytime. My phone, text is the best way. Generally in meetings all day, so it stays on silent most of the day, but I try to get back to it in between. But yeah, I mean, input is the important part. We build this through conversations. I mean, this is what's happening right now is key to how we make this happen in the future. And so I love being part of it, and I appreciate any opportunity to have these discussions. And feel free to reach out anytime, and any resources or anything that you see that you want further clarification on, let me know, and we're more than happy to get that out.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks everyone for your great questions.
Yeah,
really appreciate it. We're lucky to have a champion like you in the region, and we'll see you all next week, or some of you next week, and look forward to any other suggestions for guest speakers. Maybe some of the groups that you've suggested, Brent, would join us in the future. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.